So fingers crossed. Here we go. I want to, before we start, also one last housekeeping item. I want to give the disclaimer for myself and all of the speakers. The views each of us expressed today are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the PCAOB board, staff, or any board member. So with that, I want to start. We are delighted to have our chairman, Bill Duhnke, with us today to kick us off. Bill was sworn in as the chairman of the PCAOB in January of 2018. Prior to that, he was the majority staff director and general counsel to the U.S. Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. His whole bio is on our website if you want to read about him. But Bill, I want to start with you today. I think our audience would probably be interested in hearing about why you have prioritized engagement with audit committees as a key priority, as well as what the PCAOB is doing related to COVID-19, both internally and externally.
Great, thanks, Erin. Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. And thank you to the over 300 audit committee members joining us today. Very impressive turnout. We thank you for that. Since we first joined the PCAOB, it's been a priority of the board for us to engage more often and more directly with audit committees. I've said many times that we view an informed and engaged audit committee member as a force multiplier in our work to promote audit quality. When my colleagues and I began reaching out, we heard feedback early on that the PCAOB wasn't necessarily playing well with others, and that it was rarely receptive to feedback from stakeholders, whether they're audit committees or investors, preparers, or others. Consequently, we've been actively trying to change that, and I believe we've made significant progress towards doing so. A key part of that engagement has been listening to audit committees and proactively providing opportunities for audit committees to understand our oversight work. One of the significant ways we have increased our interaction with audit committees is through reaching out to audit committee chairs of U.S. issuers whose audits we are inspecting and providing them with an opportunity to engage with us during the inspections process. We, of course, have no jurisdiction over audit committees, as you all know, so interactions with us or inspectors is entirely voluntary, but we've been extremely pleased with the response. In 2019, our goal was to reach out to all of the audit committee chairs of U.S. issuers whose audits we inspected. We succeeded in speaking to nearly 400 audit committee chairs compared to about 80 in prior years. We are doing the same outreach this year, and the reaction we received from the call so far continues to be very positive. In fact, it was during these calls that we heard opportunities like today's webinar might be of interest. So that's why we are here today hosting our first ever webinar for audit committees. We hope that you will find the content of today's webinar useful in your audit oversight role, and we also hope that you will continue to engage with us. While your role has always been important, it's even more critical now. Audit quality takes on an added importance as investors depend now, more than ever, on the integrity of financial statements when making investment decisions. Before I turn back to Erin and our panel, I'll just give a brief overview of the PCAOB's response to the COVID-19 crisis. As I'm sure is the case with just about everyone on this call, the crisis has presented a number of new challenges that have required a great deal of flexibility. In determining how to proceed, however, we were guided by two foundational considerations. The first, of course, was the health and safety of our employees and those with whom we interact. And second was continuing to fulfill our statutory mission to promote audit quality, which includes conducting our inspections. With that in mind, we moved all staff to mandatory work from home on March 18th. And since then, with some minor bumps along the way, we've continued to operate effectively and efficiently. The most significant change to our operations due to working from home has been with our inspections program. We've moved from conducting the majority of our inspections in person to 100% remote inspections. We've been closely coordinating with the firms to make this work, and while it has certainly been an adjustment for both sides, we are pleased with how well it has gone to date. We have a COVID-19 resource center on our website homepages that has all of our relevant external updates and activities, so please feel free to take a look at that. We issued a staff document with reminders for audits nearing completion. We also provided audit firms with the opportunity for a 45-day delay from our inspections. resumed inspections at a more normal pace, albeit still remotely, on May 11th. Megan, Christine, and Erin will provide additional details on those items, so at this time I'll return it over to them. But before I do so, let me thank you again for joining us today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. So, Erin, back to you.
Thanks, Chairman Duhnke. So I want to follow up on a couple things you said. You've really set the stage nicely, and I want to continue on the topic of COVID a bit, since that's obviously something that is top of mind for all of us right now. In addition to the activities the PCAOB has undertaken internally as well as for the firms, as Chairman Duhnke mentioned, in the audit committee chair calls that we're having with the issuers who are inspecting, we have been talking to them about COVID and how they're thinking about it and addressing it with their auditor. We've had about 100 calls where we've talked to audit committee chairs so far about this. And what we've heard has really largely been dependent on the industry or the specific issuer, since COVID's affecting different companies quite differently. But there have been a couple things that we've heard almost universally that we did want to share with you today. First and foremost, what we've heard is that audit committees were initially quite worried about the impact of COVID-19 and the quick transition that both company management and external auditors made to an almost entirely remote workforce. But most of them have shared with us that they've been quite pleasantly surprised at how smoothly that's gone, and that both internal and external audit functions were able to effectively and efficiently transition to the remote work. Specifically, of course, audit committees have been focused on internal control over financial reporting, and in their views, those have been maintained and managed well. Also, another issue related to remote work, of course, that we're hearing a lot about is cyber. We've heard from audit committee chairs that they've spent a lot of time addressing cyber risks, including particularly making sure that controls are in place around cyber and technologies related to financial reporting. The other thing we've heard pretty consistently from audit committee chairs is that the communications with their auditors have increased pretty significantly. Probably the most common thing that's not surprising is that they've had added discussions around potential challenges to completing audit work on time. So they're reviewing and discussing any needed adjustments to the audit plan. And again, they're also having incremental conversations around ICFR and whether there's any new controls or modifications to existing controls that they need to put into place given the remote environment. And lastly, a couple items we've heard that aren't directly related to the financial statement audit, but that we understand audit committees are spending quite a bit of time on right now, are first, enterprise risk management. Looking at the ERM plans they had, we've sort of heard two different things. One is that some audit committee chairs feel like their enterprise risk management plans have been effective in this situation with just a few modifications or tweaks, while others have shared that they've sort of had to throw them out the window because their ERM or crisis plans didn't really envision a crisis that lasted as many months as this pandemic has. Related to that, this ongoing and long-lasting crisis is company culture, and audit committees are sharing with us that they're very focused on how they're supporting management as well as the external auditor in what obviously is a prolonged stressful environment, and they're quite aware of the sort of increased risks that come with that, including related to the opportunity for fraud. So that's what we've heard from audit committee chairs. I now want to turn to Megan Zietsman, our chief auditor, to talk a little bit about how she and her office of the chief auditor have been thinking about COVID as it relates to our standards, as well as any challenges that it presents for the audit firm. So Megan, can you talk to us a bit about what you've been talking to the firms about in terms of auditing in the COVID environment?
Sure, thanks Erin, and hello everyone. So from a standards perspective and the Office of the Chief Auditor's perspective, we are very keenly interested in how our standards are being applied in today's challenging environment. We've been collaborating closely with our colleagues in the Division of Registration and Inspections as they've been engaging with the firms and looking at what is being done to respond to the COVID-19 challenges. And I'm sure you'll hear more from Christine about this shortly. So from an OCA perspective, we've been monitoring the guidance that the firms have been producing, really to learn about what things they are finding most challenging and where they're providing additional direction for the auditors in the field. We've been participating in meetings with international standard setters and other audit regulators to hear what they are learning and thinking about. And as Bill mentioned early on, we did think it was important to communicate about the importance of the work that auditors do, in particular the importance of that work being done in accordance with our standards, given the reliance by investors on kind of more than ever the integrity of financial statements. So in early April, we issued what we call a spotlight document, and this was intended to provide reminders to auditors of issuers and broker-dealers that were nearing completion. So, or guidance to auditors for audits that were nearing completion, understanding that at that time the firms were dealing with very time-sensitive and complex auditing issues in light of the unfolding crisis. So the spotlight's not authoritative, but it does point to very key aspects and requirements that are in our standards. So some of the key reminders that we made were around the auditor's responsibilities for identifying risks and the need for consideration for revisions to those risk assessments as the environment changes and evolves. So without being prescriptive, we highlighted the areas in the financial statements where we thought risks might be elevated or where they might be changing and where auditors should be paying attention. We also highlighted challenges that may exist in relation to auditing in a remote environment, and that included as it relates to observing management processes and controls, interacting with management, conducting physical observations like inventory observations, and also interacting with members of the engagement team, including in particular in the case of multi-location audit engagements where you may have other auditors involved sitting in other countries or other jurisdictions. And we also reiterated the importance of considering how management processes and controls might be evolving in the kind of changing environment, and that really might give rise to elevated or new risks of fraud or error that the auditors should be focused on. Another important reminder in that spotlight document was around the need for auditors to be engaging and communicating with audit committees. So building off the requirements that sit in our existing standards, we emphasize the importance of telling people that it's important to be talking to the audit committees about changes in the plans, changes in risk assessments, with regards to matters that might be the auditor might be focusing on with respect to accounting policies, practices, estimates, as well as control-related matters. Of course, we realize that the challenges related to COVID-19 are ongoing and evolving. We're continuing to monitor the situation to assess whether additional communication from the PCAOB is warranted. Even though our spotlight document was targeted at that time specifically at the audits that were nearing completion, kind of as the pandemic set in, many of the reminders that we have in there are applicable to ongoing audits as well. So with that, Erin, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Megan. I want to turn it to Christine now. So Christine Gunia leads the inspections for the global network firms. And I want to talk, Christine, a little bit about how inspections have been going in this environment. As the chairman mentioned, we had given firms a 45-day relief period ending in mid-May. So can you talk to us a little bit about what was happening during that period as it relates to inspections, as well as what...
Yes, Erin, of course, and thank you. So the short answer is there was a lot happening with inspections during that 45-day period, and quite frankly, a lot continues to happen. Two key points that I want to touch on. First is that even though we offered all firms an opportunity for a 45-day relief from our inspections, not all firms availed themselves to that relief, and those that did so to varying degrees. And then the second point I'll make is that during that period, and I want to underscore, our staff, inspection staff, remained hard at work, continuing to fulfill our mission, albeit remotely, during that period, and they continue to do so today. So to my first point, a little bit more detail, that is with respect to the firms that did take the relief. Not all of them did. Those who didn't did so perhaps to varying degrees, not only across the firms, but even within the firm, depending on the engagements that were selected for inspection. So I'll tell you a little bit more, but I'll focus on the global network firms, the U.S. global network firms. So towards the beginning, if not even before the 45-day relief was offered, we were in regular communication with leadership of the firm to understand the challenges that the firm's professionals were facing and the progress they were making to moving to the remote work environment. Further, at a lower level, at the engagement team level, we sought to understand specific challenges that the firm's professionals were facing, whether it be with respect to client-specific matters, client deadlines, the inability to get information from clients, what have you, and or just their personal challenges. They had child care issues just as many of us, as just one example. So the more specificity we could understand with respect to those challenges and that communication provided us, allowed us to have better dialogue with respect to which inspections would continue during the 45-day relief and which needed that additional relief period. In all cases, during that 45-day time frame, we continued to notify the firms of the audits that were selected for inspection. And we did that for a couple reasons. One is so that the firms could then turn to those engagement teams so we can better understand these challenges, but also so that the firms could provide us with access to their electronic work papers. And that's something they've always done for us, again, the U.S. global network firms, but that allowed us to continue to at least access their work while they were taking relief, if they were, and to review that work before we could officially begin our review. Which leads me to my second point, why and how our staff were hard at work during that period. In addition to doing things like processing firm remediation evaluations and or processing prior inspection reports, our staff were quite busy, having received via a secure exchange, having received access to the firm's work papers for those audits that we notified them that we would review, and they were busy reviewing and accumulating those questions so that for those engagements and or those firms that did choose the 45-day relief, once that period expired on May 11, we were ready to go and engage in the dialogue. So that kind of brings us to where we are now. We continue to inspect remotely. We have access to those work papers electronically. We're using technology in a lot of ways to help us and to facilitate our reviews. We use technology to share the content. So we pull up the work papers on the video screens. We're able, with the firm's professionals and us, to look at the work papers to understand the content that we're all discussing and exchanging the dialogue on. We're to some extent also experimenting with video and other forms of technology to keep the work as effective as possible. I will say, and this is not unexpected, the efficiency certainly is not what it was had we been in person conducting our reviews. However, we give ourselves, and more importantly, the auditors, as much time as they need to get the answers, to engage in the dialogue, and if that means taking a little extra time, which it has, to complete these reviews, then we're absolutely happy to give it, and we'll continue to give that flexibility. But all in all, I'd say, you know, we're very pleased with how things have gone during the 45 days, as well as they continue now post that May 11 expiration, as we continue to execute our inspections remotely. Back to you, Erin.
Great, thanks, Christine. So I want to stick with the topic of inspections, but pivot slightly to our new inspections report. So as we sent to some of you, Christine, can you mute yourself? As we sent to y'all for the pre-read, we issued in early June a new formatted inspection report, really the first time the PCAOB has substantially changed our inspections reports in the 15 years since we've been issuing them. We made these changes in response to feedback we've received from stakeholders and frankly, primarily audit committees who have told us that they were not very useful and easy to read. So the new report content is streamlined and we've tried to reduce the technical and boilerplate language. We've also included some new charts and graphs to try to make the information more accessible to all users. Additionally, to try and improve our transparency and our findings, we have also included information not previously communicated in our inspections report. And I want to highlight three new things we've included that may be of interest particularly to this group. The first is a classification system for audits with deficiencies, and that's presented in Part 1A of the new report. For annually inspected firms, we also now provide the inspections data from the previous 3 inspections years, so that's all in one place. And then lastly, we have a new section called Part 1B, and that discusses certain instances of non-compliance with PCAOB standards or rules. So if you haven't yet, I really encourage you to take a look at the new reports. The feedback early is good, but we certainly welcome any more feedback from audit committees in particular as we continue to try to improve the reports and make them as useful to our stakeholders as possible. So with that, Christine, I want to pass it back to you because you've shared a bit about the logistics of our inspections in light of COVID, and I've just talked about our new reports. So I want to go ahead and kind of take a look ahead. Can you tell us a little bit about what audit committees can inspect?
Sure, Erin. So as I mentioned, our U.S. inspections are pretty much well underway. Looking ahead to 2020, we are making some progress, and we've actually commenced some of our non-U.S. inspections, but we're making additional progress in working with the leadership and foreign regulators of the international firms with some hopes that we can conduct more of those inspections remotely as well. But back to the U.S. and what 2020, what lies ahead of us in 2020. So thus far, we have actually begun, not a surprise, engaging in discussions with the firms, primarily I'll speak again to the largest U.S. firms, about what they're doing in response to COVID-19. We're understanding the policies, the guidance, the tools that they're making available to their professionals to audit in the remote working environment, as well as to understand things that are affecting engagement performance, things such as what Megan made reference to, how to identify and or assess risks of material misstatement to the financial statements that may be caused directly by the COVID-19 and related economic challenges. Other examples of things that we're discussing with them and trying to understand the tools and support they're providing to their audit professionals include things like the auditors need to evaluate a company's ability to continue as a going concern. So lots going on in that area. Certainly, as in prior years, our inspections are heavily based or focused on calendar year ends. However, in the inspection process, we often do select off-calendar year ends, and so the 2020 audits with off-calendar year ends should give us some opportunity to look at some of those things that the auditor has done to respond to the risks related to COVID, and in turn the policies and procedures and whatnot that the firms have been discussing with us. But let me move on, although still staying not straying too far from that topic. In 2019, we increased our focus on firms' systems of quality control, and we expect to and are continuing that focus in 2020. We are expanding that focus to a couple additional firms. And we're also thinking about that focus in the context of the current environment. Like I said, engagement performance has its own challenges, so what is the firm's system of quality control addressing with respect to those challenges, how the firm might be using technology in the audit, that's often another area that we'll look at controls, the firm's quality controls over. And then another key component of a firm's system of quality control is monitoring. Internal inspections being a primary program that firms have in place to support the monitoring function. And even in today's environment, we're already aware of some changes, not a surprise that the firms are having to make to their system of quality control, specifically with respect to internal inspections. Like us, they're having to conduct their inspections remotely. So our focus on quality controls, or the firm's system of quality control in 2020, will continue, and we'll touch on some of those areas. A couple other topics. We, like in prior years, we often look to new accounting and or auditing standards that the auditor will be working through. So we've got new auditing standards this year, CAMS, and I'll come back to that at the end of towards the end of the discussion here today. We've got new auditing estimates and use of specialists coming up in the future, so we'll be looking to understand what firms are doing to prepare themselves for those new auditing standards. And then certainly, at least for me anyway, no discussion of inspection areas and whatnot would be complete without a quick reference to auditor independence. That continues to be an area of our inspection focus and will be in 2020 in light of the importance that auditor independence has, and in light of the historical deficiencies that we and the firms have identified in that area. So certainly there's plenty more focus, a lot more to come, but I want to be mindful of the time. I'll turn it back to you, Erin.
Thanks, Christine. And we have a lot of questions coming in, and we appreciate that, so please keep them coming. And we are, like I said, going to get to as many of those as we can. But I want to turn back to Megan before we do that to talk a little bit about our standard setting agenda and research projects agenda. Megan, you've talked a little bit about standards during COVID, but can you give us an update on where things stand with the quality control project? And I also think it might be interesting for this group to hear a brief overview of where we are on the estimates and specialists standards that will begin going into effect at.
So, Erin, I'd be happy to do that. So let me talk a little bit about quality control first. So we do have a standard setting project underway to overhaul the PCAOB's quality control standards, which are the standards that address the requirements for a firm's system of quality control, which really provides the quality foundation for the performance of the engagements that a firm does. We issued a concept release at the end of last year to solicit input from stakeholders on a possible way forward for a proposed PCAOB standard. And we received 36 comment letters and are now in the process of analyzing those comments and making progress on a proposal for a new PCAOB standard. Commenters were broadly supportive of the project, of us going forward, saw the need for it, and the majority of our commenters also supported us using a standard that is currently under development at the international level by the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board called ISQM1 as the base for our project. So that standard is under development. It's targeted for finalization at the end of this year. This approach involves, or the approach embodied in that standard, and the one that we are thinking about, is a risk-based approach, which would involve a framework for firms to think about quality objectives, think about risks to the achievement of those objectives, and then put in place responses that will address those risks. And all of that would be done based on the nature and circumstances of each firm, which enables it to be capable of being adapted to firms that are of differing sizes, differing complexities, etc. And then it would have a very strong focus on the need for monitoring and remediation, and then kind of that feedback loop that would go back to the risk assessment process. So those concepts will sound very familiar, I'm sure, to you, to COSO-like, ICFR-like. It's all of those kinds of concepts that would be embodied in this kind of a framework. I think the support that we received from our commenters was also consistent with what we pointed out in the concept release, that many firms do engagements under different sets of standards. So in addition to PCAOB standards, you could have firms doing AICPA engagements or engagements under international standards. And then given the foundational nature of a firm's QC system, it really would be quite difficult, if not impossible, for firms to design and operate fundamentally different systems of QC for different engagements. So I think that was at the root also of some of the support for the proposed approach to use ISQM1 as a base. But however, as we did point out in the concept release, and I think this was acknowledged by our commenters as well, a proposed PCAOB standard would need to be supplemented or tailored to address things like aligning with the federal securities laws, the SEC's rules, other PCAOB standards and rules, also retain important topics that sit in our existing standards that are either not dealt with or are not dealt with as specifically in the international proposal. And that we also should be informed by the results of our oversight activities and be more targeted about those places where we think firms need more specific direction to really prompt appropriate implementation. So, like I mentioned, we recognize the need for scalability. We think that the risk-based approach is something that will provide for that. And that means not only scaling down, but also scaling up. So scaling up to be suitable for a large complex firm, but also capable of being scaled down for a firm that is smaller and less complex. So certainly if you're interested in reading more, the concept release and the comment letters are all posted on our website. And as I mentioned, we are hard at work in thinking about how to move onwards to a PCAOB proposal. So let me now talk quickly about estimates and specialists. So I think Christine mentioned that, and Erin in your lead-in, that these are two new rulemakings that will go into effect for audits of basically calendar year-end companies. Many of the new requirements actually start with risk assessment. So in many cases, especially for the larger audits, they're already in play, and auditors would be already using them to direct their work. Our estimate standard establishes a single standard for really a uniform risk-based approach to the auditing of estimates, including fair value measurements. It puts emphasis on things like the need for professional skepticism, taking account of careful consideration of where there could be potential management bias. And then it also has some direction on addressing certain specific unique aspects of auditing the fair values of financial instruments. On the specialist side, our amendments really took on company specialists and auditor specialists, recognizing that each of those could either be engaged or employed. And really what we did was to sort out and strengthen the requirements so that it's now more clear how the auditor thinks about the work that might be done by a company specialist, and then look at the supervisory approach that an auditor would use to an auditor specialist. Of course, we realize that these new requirements are being applied in extraordinary times, so in situations that continue to evolve. The uncertainty and volatility of the current economic environment is likely to have a very significant effect on measurement uncertainty and the complexity of accounting estimates, and therefore on the management judgments involved in making them. And we also recognize that management may be increasing involvement of specialists to assist in the preparation of these estimates. And then, of course, changes to processes and controls brought on also by the challenges of the current environment. So I think it's fair to say that this will be challenging. I think I would also like to point out that the effects of these new requirements is not necessarily going to be uniform across all audits or even among all firms. So some auditors' practices, and we acknowledge, and I think this is actually pointed out in our release, some of the things that auditors are doing today or were doing are already aligned with some of the strengthened requirements, but that obviously there is a degree of variation. Changes in financial reporting over recent years have led to an increase in the use of accounting estimates and fair value measurements. But of course, the nature of accounting estimates can vary from one company to another, and vary depending on factors like the business model, the nature of the business transactions, etc. And then, of course, practices around company specialists can vary. And then, of course, you get the involvement of auditor specialists also varying. So you take all of those variables into account, and the impact of these new standards is going to is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. From the perspective of supporting implementation, we've produced some materials that we hope will be helpful to auditors. We have some shorter pieces that we produced last year that really were around raising awareness of the new requirements, pointing out where there was good guidance in the releases. We've also produced some videos that highlight the new requirements and a guide to assist in navigating the new standards on our website. So we'll be continuing our outreach efforts to understand how the implementation of all of these is progressing. So with that, Erin, back to you.
Thanks, Megan. And as we've been talking, we've been getting some questions about technology, which, as we're seeing from this webinar experience, we're all getting a little more comfortable and have our challenges with. But Megan, if you can talk a little bit about technology as it relates to the audit, but specifically sort of what we are doing on our data and
Sure, Erin, happy to do that. So our research project is aligned with the board's strategic plan, which highlights that in light of increasing use of technology by auditors and preparers, we need to anticipate and respond to innovations and corresponding opportunities and risks. So we put this project on the agenda some years ago, and it continues to be one that we work with, that we're working very actively and hard on. Our activities to date have included really gaining and then maintaining an understanding of how technology-based tools, including data analytics, are being used by auditors to identify and assess risks of material misstatement, which are really the foundation for planning an audit. Based on these activities, we've also been looking very carefully at our standards. We don't see indications that the standards are currently impeding or detracting from firms' abilities to use the technology-based tools, but we're acutely aware and we understand that the standards don't necessarily explicitly encourage the use of the tools or indicate whether use might not be appropriate or even highlight risks or pitfalls. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about and monitoring. So we will be considering how those potentially could be addressed as we evolve our standards and again also whether there's a need for guidance or other regulatory action. Our focus this year is to continue updating our understanding, and I think, as has been pointed out, the way in which technology is being used by both preparers and auditors in the current environment is evolving and changing. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to see. I think we've heard in some cases that the current environment has been an accelerant for use of technology-based tools. We're continuing to do a more in-depth analysis of our standards, in particular to the aspects that deal with the responses to risk and understanding how our practice is evolving. And like for all our projects, we also continue to understand what other regulators and standard setters are doing. So we recognize, obviously, that the use of these tools can enhance audit quality. For some firms, we are already seeing very well thought out methodologies, very thoughtful use of the tools, also clear requirements that are being established for how engagement teams should actually be using them, the things that need to be thought about at the engagement level. And I think it is important for firms to have very important quality controls around acquisition, development, maintenance of these tools, and then for establishing guidelines on how to use them at the engagement level. So that is something that we are focused on in our QC standard setting project. One point I'd also make is I think it is important that auditors be thoughtful in how they are actually using technology. So sometimes a traditional procedure might actually be simpler and more effective. So I think it is important for teams to be thinking about that so that they can follow the directions and requirements and really think about how to do quality work. And sometimes traditional might actually work well. And obviously it remains of paramount importance for auditors to exercise professional skepticism when evaluating the results of a tool and really making sure that that's being thoughtfully challenged and really is providing the evidence that auditors are seeking for it to provide. As I wrap up, I'll just mention I think we sent two pre-reads out. One is really just an update on our data and technology project, so covered a bunch of the points that I've just briefly outlined. It also has some more specific observations on the application of our audit evidence standard. And then we put out another one that was a little bit more targeted and had some observations for audits involving crypto assets. And that one in particular included some questions that audit committees of issuers who are holding or transacting in crypto assets might ask of their auditors.
Okay, thanks, Megan. I do want to cover one last topic that we had on our agenda, so as not to shortchange critical audit matters, but we'll go through this a bit quickly because, as I said, we have a lot of questions, so I want to turn to those. But as many of you know, last year, the requirement for auditors to include critical audit matters in their audit report went into effect for large accelerated filers with fiscal year end June 30, 2019 or after. The second effective date for implementation, which impacts issuers to all other issuers for which the requirement applies, will go into effect for audits of fiscal years ending on or after December 15 of 2020. So that's upcoming for many issuers at the end of this year for their audits. As a reminder, CAMs are matters that meet 4 criteria. They must arise from the financial statement. 2, they must be communicated or are required to be communicated with the audit committee. 3, they relate to accounts or disclosures that are material to the financial statement. And lastly, they require especially challenging, subjective, or complex auditor judgment. So we are currently doing an interim analysis of how the first tranche of implementation went with large accelerated filers, and our Office of Economic Risk and Analysis is looking at what the early experiences with CAMs have been. We've conducted an investor survey as well as surveying audit firms and engagement teams to get their feedback. We also last year spoke with the audit committee chairs of 12 large accelerated filers whose audits we actually inspected specifically for CAMs last year. We also spoke with management, generally the CFO or controller for those 12 large accelerated filers as well. So Christine, with that sort of as a high-level background, could you tell the group a bit about what we did in 2019 as we inspected the CAMs of those 12 large accelerated filers?
I can do that, Erin. Yes, thank you. So in 2019, our inspections were limited, our CAM inspections were limited not only by the numbers, as Erin mentioned. There were just 12 large accelerated filers, the audits that we looked at in the fall of 2019. And those reviews were focused solely on the auditor's work surrounding the determination and communication of CAMs. So very limited both in number and in nature. Notwithstanding that, though, we did have some good observations, and those are available in the Spotlight, the CAM Spotlight I know that was shared as pre-read material and is available on the website. So I won't go into those observations, but let me quickly compare and contrast last year's procedures to what we're doing this year. We have a larger population, of course, from which to select audits that have applied the CAM reporting provisions. So we're looking at a larger population, and our work is also, I guess, I'll say, going deeper. Not only are we looking at the determination and the communication of CAMs, but by virtue of us reviewing, which we normally do, selected areas of the audit, we're able to look at the audit work beneath those CAMs. We're seeing significant overlap or sufficient overlap between the audit areas that we select for reviews. We can look at the actual audit procedures and then how, if at all, and in many cases they do, just by the nature and the significance of the areas that we select, how they translate or transfer from through the auditor's determination as to whether or not they were CAMs, and then in turn how they're included in the auditor's report. So a little bit more deeper, certainly, compared to last year, and more in number. And so this larger population and then this additional look should give us a better idea of how firms are complying with the new standard or the provisions, and also to gather additional information to support the board's monitoring activities surrounding this project.
Great, thanks, Christine. So I am going to turn now to the questions that we've been receiving. There have been a lot, so unfortunately we are not probably going to get to them all. But I want to start on sort of the broad topic of international. We've had several questions related to sort of international topics. So Chairman Duhnke, I would like to start with you. We've had a few questions on China, which, as we all know, is a hot topic, and I will flag for this audience that tomorrow on July 9th, the SEC is having a roundtable on emerging markets that the chairman's participating in and speaking at 11, and you can watch that on their website. So we'll go into a lot of detail then. But Chairman Duhnke, do you want to talk a bit about sort of your
Sure. Over the PCAOB's history, there have been near constant discussions with the Chinese authorities over our inspections access. To date, those discussions have not led to any firm or final agreements, unfortunately. From our perspective, any further discussions about access are unlikely to be productive unless and until the Chinese authorities are willing to embrace certain core principles that are fundamental to our ability to accomplish our mission. Those principles include our ability to conduct inspections and investigations consistent with our mandate, the ability for us to select the audit work and potential violations to be examined, and then also having access to firm personnel, audit work papers, and other information documents deemed relevant by our teams. With China as the only exception, wherever an agreement is required, we have either directly or together with other regulators established arrangements that implement these core principles. In entering formal cooperative arrangements, we have developed cooperative approaches that respond to specific legal requirements. This has not been an issue except with China. Without fail, for every other country that has sought a cooperative approach that responds to specific legal requirements, we have found a path forward that allows us to accomplish our mandate. Over the past decade, we've explored various approaches to cooperation to address issues raised by the Chinese authorities. These efforts have failed to result in a viable model for cooperation because the Chinese authorities refuse to accept these principles in practice. Notwithstanding statements by the Chinese side that they have worked with us to find a path forward, the fact remains that they reject our principles in application, and they have made it clear through both negotiations and failed attempts at cooperation. For example, the Chinese authorities have consistently stated that we cannot inspect audits of state-owned enterprises, despite the fact that those enterprises have shares listed on our U.S. exchanges. Chinese authorities have also made plain their intention to redact or refuse access to audit work papers in ways that will not allow us to complete our inspections. Chinese authorities have also made clear through our interactions that they will seek to influence the scope of our inspections and how we perform our work. Without acceptance of our principles, we cannot perform our mandate, and therefore the impasse remains.
Great, thanks, Chairman Duhnke. Yeah, can you mute? Thanks. I'm going to turn to Christine on sticking with the international overarching topic. We've had some questions about if there are any unique.
Okay. Sure, Erin, happy to do so. Yes, of course, there are some additional and unique challenges to the non-U.S. inspections, but we are working very closely with foreign regulators and the firms to help us overcome them. I guess two that I'll mention are related to use of translators, not necessarily something new to us to the extent we need to use translators. However, in the remote work environment, where the translator sits is often a question, so how we can best utilize the resources and or skill sets of translators is one particular challenge. Another one that comes to mind is time zone differences. Again, working from your home, but having to accommodate, the multiple hours of time differences, not only on our part, but also on the part of the firms that have to engage with us. That's something that is a unique challenge to non-U.S. inspections. But we're working through those, and like I said, we're collaborating significantly with our foreign counterparts, and the firms are being very cooperative. Technology, another one. And in fact, we've actually have started and are in the process of conducting some non-U.S. inspections. So we're hopeful to continue to get more progress and gain more traction, especially as we work from home and overcome some of these challenges and learn better practices.
Great, thanks, Christine. I'm going to stick with the hot topics on the news.
Sure. I guess first and foremost, Wirecard was not a U.S. issuer under Sarbanes-Oxley, which means that the audit of EY Germany performed by them was not within our jurisdiction. With that said, as we do with other significant financial reporting failure cases that arise around the globe, we will monitor the developments related to Wirecard. We'll monitor them very closely. We are in close contact with our counterparts in Germany, with whom we have a long-standing and productive relationship. To the extent that we learn any information that suggests we should approach our oversight of U.S. issuers differently, we plan to adjust our activities accordingly. As always, we're happy to learn from our own mistakes, but happier to learn from others. So that's why we watch this stuff very closely.
Great. Thanks, Chairman Duhnke. I'm going to quickly answer a question that I saw come up in the Q&A box about any feedback on how or if investors are using CAMs. I talk to investors pretty frequently, and the honest answer is I don't know if many of them are using them yet, but we do know some are, and we have a public request for comment out. And you can view the responses we've gotten from some of the investor associations, CII, CFA Institute, a few individual investors have written in. But we also have, as part of the interim analysis that I mentioned earlier, conducted an investor-specific targeted survey about how they are using CAMs, and our economists will be looking closely at those responses that we get from them. I do want to now turn to a question that comes up very frequently with audit committee members, and probably I would count it as what I'm asked most frequently. But I am going to ask Chairman Duhnke to respond to this today, and that is if you could speak a little.
Sure. Obviously, we acknowledge the need to issue our inspection reports in a more timely manner. Now that we've worked through the new inspections report format, we anticipate that we will issue reports in a much more timely manner going forward than we have previously. And I just want everyone to know this is a very significant area of focus for us, and we're to keep working to make sure that they come out as soon as they possibly can. But we also depend a great deal on the response we get, so we encourage everyone to let us know.
Great. And Megan, we had a question come in about sort of how we coordinate and communicate on new accounting standards. So I wanted to see the example specifically given in the question was about CECL, but I think really what the question is at a high level is there a process to ensure that audit firms are auditing new accounting standards in a consistent manner?
Sure, Erin. So we certainly think about new accounting standards and think about new challenges that they might present relative to to how they're audited. Obviously, we stay close to what the FASB are doing and think about things as they're making their way through the standard setting process. And then as they become effective, we think about it, and certainly in the past there has been guidance that the PCAOB has issued. For example, we did a practice alert on revenue some years ago that highlighted some of the particular challenges that auditors might face in auditing the issuer's application of that standard. Another example would be what's going on right now with CECL. So, for example, we are monitoring what's happening there. We're engaging with auditors, particularly focused on auditors of smaller banks, and then staying close to the banking examiners as well. So, I think obviously in that case, many of the smaller banks and their auditors have benefited from the delay in the effective dates, but that has been helpful to give them a little bit more time. So I think the short answer is that we stay on top of that, we monitor it. I did mention that with respect to our new standards on estimates and specialists, we're thinking about that as it applies to estimates and newer and evolving estimates that are included in the financial statements. We listen to questions, and then we think about whether there's a need for the PCAOB to provide specific guidance. And then, of course, I think, as you mentioned, we work closely with our colleagues in DRI to really get ready for inspections.
Yes, Megan, thank you. And I mentioned in my remarks that new accounting and or auditing standards are often a focus of our inspections. So I'll speak specifically this year to CECL, recognizing it's not yet effective. But we do perform procedures across the firms, and I'll put them into two categories. One is firm-level procedures. So we will interview, as an example, leadership of the firm to understand how they're approaching the upcoming accounting changes that their issuer audits will soon need to apply in the future. Try to understand things they're doing to prepare their auditors, whether it be by giving them additional tools, changes to methodology and guidance, whatever support, maybe be through additional consultation requirements and whatnot. So we perform procedures like that to develop our understanding at the firm level. And then for audits that are selected for review, to the extent those audits are of issuers for something like CECL, where the new accounting standard will apply, we will perform engagement level procedures, really just to engage in discussion and interview the audit team members to understand how the issuer is progressing. Are they meeting milestones, as an example? What types of changes to their systems, to their controls, to technology might they have made in anticipation of new accounting standards if it's necessary, and what challenges they're facing. So again, firm level and engagement level, and then the particular subject likely will change, but this year's focus is on CECL.
Great, thanks, Megan and Christine.
Oh, Erin, this is so unexpected. Yeah, I definitely would like to thank everyone for participating, and thanks to Erin, Megan, and Christine for pulling this together. Obviously, our intent here is to keep a conversation going between us and audit committee members. It's very important that we hear from you and that you communicate with us the things that we can do to help you do your job as we work hard to do ours. So please feel free to always reach out to us and contact us. Erin is your immediate point of contact through our liaison office, but you're free to contact me directly as well.
Thanks, Chairman Duhnke. And I echo his thanks. Technical difficulties aside, we do hope to do this again, and we hope that you found it useful. I do know that we did not get to all of your questions. We will try to follow up to the extent that we can to any remaining questions, but we do just really appreciate you engaging with us. We learn a lot from you. Hopefully you all learned something today from us. And as I mentioned at the outset, this will be available on replay on our website by early next week. So if you were having any technical difficulties at the beginning, you can find us on the website and